Okay, so this one is going to be a little bit grammar, a little bit writing. But logical fallacies are something that it's important to watch out for in writing because these are problematic argument types that don't really have a factual or firm ground kind of basis with which to kind of hang your hat on if you're trying to make an argument. So I chose the 15 that are most common. There are more, but these are the ones that I would probably be the most aware of if I was writing at the undergraduate or the college level. So if you're trying to prove something, or if you are trying to make some sort of an argument about something or someone, these are sort of examples of things that you wouldn't want to do. So a couple of these you'll probably understand immediately what they are. Others, like the first one, ad hominem, depending on how many of you are good with your Latin, are obviously in Latin or from antiquated sort of arguments. So ad hominem, just in the plainest sense, is if any of you watched any of the last two presidential election cycles, and you've kind of rolled your eyes at the way that the two candidates are interacting with each other, ad hominem basically just means personal attacks. So it would essentially, you could make the argument that let's say that, somebody had been living in Louisiana for a long time. But let's say that, what's a good one? Let's say that they were born in Alabama and went to the University of Alabama, a traditional rival of LSU, and they wanted to, after living here for a long time, run for governor or run for mayor or run for state senate or something like that. So if you were to say, like, let's say this person's name was Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith is unfit to be governor of Louisiana because he roots for the Alabama Crimson Tide football team, which makes him an unfit leader in the state of Louisiana. All right, that's a personal attack. And that's all ad hominem stuff is basically saying that someone is unfit for something based on a simple personal attack. Think of it as the written argument equivalent of a couple of kindergartners like making fun of each other with bad insults. Same thing. It can be much more complex than that, but essentially it's basically when you say that someone isn't fit or something isn't fit for something because of something they can't control or something that has nothing to do with what the issue is really about. And that leads us into the straw man argument. So a straw man argument essentially is setting something up to be attacked in order to distract whoever's reading it from the real issue at hand. So it intentionally, if you've ever been in a fight with a significant other or maybe a family member or a best friend or something like that, and that person realizes that they're losing the argument and they start attacking things that you're not even talking about or bringing up old, grudges that have nothing to do with what's happening at this present moment, then that's a straw man issue. So if you were to say, let's say that my wife and I were arguing about, let's say my dog charged one of our cats or something like that, and the cat got away or we picked up the dog or whatever it was. But the dog is clearly the problem there, or the cat, depending on how much they're prancing around and making themselves available. But the issue is the animals are fighting. And because I'm a dog person, my wife's more of a cat person, although we both love animals, regardless, even though we both, speaking of which, while my dog's growling, but we both love animals a lot, but we both came into this relationship with animals, so we're very defensive of the two, or the ones that we have. So if all of a sudden I'm saying, well, maybe if we would have closed the door, or if you would have paid more attention, then the cat wouldn't have gotten out, which means the dog couldn't have attacked it in the first place. And then my wife comes at me and tells me that, well, at least I didn't burn dinner last week, or something like that. That's a sort of, you're taking what the legitimate argument is actually about and bringing it back to something that was done previously, not debated. I'm sure you've seen that, whether it's at a family reunion from somebody who can't let something die, or even if you're just even in a healthy relationship, or you've watched your parents argue, or you have that couple that's friends with you that, tends to fight about stuff that's not really an issue at this point. So straw man arguments are essentially you're attacking something, that's not really being debated. Like, for example, let's say that, I don't know, I hate to keep going back to the political sphere, but let's say that your only argument in 2016, your only argument for Trump not being elected president is that he's been divorced a couple of times. Well, yeah, I mean, it's not the nicest thing in the world, but lots of people get divorced. So you can't really say that someone is unfit to, govern a country because they made bad decisions in love. So there you go. All right. So an appeal to ignorance. Essentially, this is someone trying to claim that something must be true because nothing disproves it. So a good example for that would be me saying, for example, I don't know, nobody has ever disproven that aliens don't exist, so they must be real. Or that just because we haven't found a dragon, they must be real, or something along those lines. So an appeal to ignorance is essentially if you take something that can't be proven and act like that equals truth. All right? Slippery slope. I'm sure you've heard this term before. False dilemma. It's what's called the limited option debate. And the most primary example that I can think of is America, love it or leave it. So it's only giving you two options. You can either love everything that America does, or you need to, in the words of South Park, get out. There are more options than that. You can attempt to inspire change, or you could simply try and focus on the good things that are happening, in this country. But the way that a lot of people say that is, if you don't love America as much as I do, you need to leave. And quite frankly, I remember in 2006 after the election, or 2016 after the election, so many Americans researched moving to Canada that we crashed their servers. So it's not like that's untrue, but they definitely aren't the only two options. Slippery slope, a course of action that causes a chain of events. So if we were looking for an example of that, let's see. All right, so, sorry, I've got a list of examples over here. So a slippery slope would be like, if you miss tennis practice, then go hang out with your friends. That means that you're never going to amount to anything, because people that can't stick to a schedule of participating in sports to hang out with their friends will never have the stick-to-itiveness to be a success in life. Therefore, you missed one practice, you're going to end up penniless on the streets, or you're going to end up, addicted to drugs or something like that. One doesn't equal the other. So automatically predicting that this grand or horrible sequence of events is going to take place because you did one little small thing doesn't really make logical sense. All right. Circular arguments are essentially when you attempt to assume truth with no prior knowledge. An example of this might be something, let's see, smoking marijuana is against the law because it's wrong. I know it's wrong because it's against the law. Well, I mean, a lot of places on planet Earth, and even some states within the United States, don't feel that it's wrong, and it's not illegal anymore. So it's not automatically wrong just because it's illegal. And by that same token, if any of you know anything about the American Revolutionary War and things like that, it was illegal to declare your independence from Great Britain. That didn't stop people from doing it. And they didn't believe that they were wrong. So, anyway. Hasty generalizations. Basing truth off of a few examples. People nowadays only vote with their emotions instead of their brains. Well, I mean, while that might be true, or it seems certainly to be true in a lot of regards, there are plenty of people that think about things, and yes, they might vote emotionally or support candidates enthusiastically with emotion, but it doesn't mean they didn't think about it. It's sort of like when there was that trend, I don't know, about 10 years ago or something like that, where a certain group of athletes, there were maybe 3 or 4 of them, started putting out there on Twitter and things like that the world was flat based on extremely limited information. Just because of a couple of little things that are somewhat easily disproven, like you're making a generalization that because this and this, the world must be flat. When in fact, there are many people that have been in outer space that can tell you very honestly that the world is not flat. So, it's hasty generalizations can lead to somewhat disastrous conclusions sometimes. Red herring is more popularly known as a trope or an element of mystery novels. Most notably Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie stories, things like that, where you are intentionally misled either by the person speaking or the character or the novelist or whatever it might be, or the filmmaker, to assume guilt based on how attractive they look as a suspect. So they're not actually the ones that are guilty of performing something, whether it's murder or theft or whatever, but they look like the most respectable candidate for that particular thing. So it's meant to deflect the attention and keep the reader guessing. So an example in terms of using this as an argument would be, my wife wants to talk about cleaning out the garage, so I asked what she wants to do with the patio furniture because it's just sitting in the garage taking up space. So in that instance, it's in order to prevent himself from having to clean the garage, which he does not want to do, he instead distracts his wife by asking about something that is garage adjacent. So if she's talking about the patio furniture, then she's not talking about how I'm not cleaning the garage. An appeal to hypocrisy. is to distract your attention, sort of similar to a red herring. But this is more of the do as I say, not as I do sort of fallacy, where one example might be that your dad is telling you not to smoke cigarettes, but you know that your dad still smoked when he was your age and even maybe past that. So how is it right for them to tell you not to smoke when in reality they did the exact same thing? All right, casual fallacies. Incorrectly attributes effects to cause. So in this, they're taking a cause and saying that because the effect is one thing, the cause must be the reason for that. So an example would be something like, here are two examples. Jim isn't at school today. He must be on a family trip. Well, there are lots of places you could be if you're not in school that day. It doesn't necessarily mean that they went on a family trip. Or another one would be, every time a rooster crows, the sun comes up. The rooster crow, not the animal crow, must be the reason that the universe got created. So just because the sun comes up when the rooster crows, which is actually more in relation to the sun coming up, not the sun coming up because the rooster crows. If any of you are fans of rock music, there is a White Stripes song. The White Stripes, it's Don't Worry About It Before Your Time, but there's a song called Cause and Effect, which is actually about, I believe it's actually about a couple arguing, but if I remember correctly, but Jack White, the lead singer, keeps saying you can't take the effect and make it the cause. So it's not really about grammatical correctness or about writing, but it actually has a very similar message. Okay, sunk cost. This is when you assume the value from the work you put in. So I don't know if any of you have ever seen Pawn Stars, and I did say pawn and not the other word that starts with a P, but because I'm guilty of asking my parents, if they've ever watched, and then I don't say pawn, I accidentally say the other thing, and my parents looked at me like I was crazy. So anyway, sunk cost, if you've ever seen that show, people will bring in, for example, like a tricked out, 1960s classic car that they paid maybe $5,000 to $10,000 for, and then they put in $20,000 to $30,000. So you have a car that's hypothetically worth somewhere between, $25,000 and $40,000 based on how much work they've put in and the cost of the car. Well, the problem is that you don't get paid back for the money that you put into the car. The car is just worth what it's worth. So the sunk cost is attempting to make the value of something higher based on the work that you put in. So you may have put $40,000 into a car. That doesn't change the fact that it's only worth $15,000. So you can't just automatically assume that because you put in a lot of work for something, that's going to raise the value. Okay? All right. An appeal to authority. This is misuse of, authorial, that can't be right. Authorial is what that should say, opinion, or from an authority. So, because Martin Sheen played the president on television, he'd probably make a great president in real life. That would be like if a bunch of aliens invaded and we said, well, Chris Hemsworth played Thor, so let's go get Chris Hemsworth to defend us. He's not really Thor. Or you can't actually get Tom Holland to go do Spider-Man things. He's just an actor. All right, equivocation. This is when you say one thing, but you mean another thing. All right, so first example. His political party wants to spend your precious tax dollars on big government, but my political party is planning strategic federal investment in critical programs. Or, example 2, I don't understand why you're saying I broke a promise. I said I would never speak to my ex-girlfriend again, and I didn't. I just sent her some pictures and some messages. So what your current girlfriend means by that is, I don't want you talking or communicating in any way with your ex. But you choose to take it literally and say, oh, well, as long as I don't call her, I can still communicate with her. That's not what, she said I wasn't allowed to do. So there you go. Appeal to pity. Basically, this is provoking your emotions to feel a particular way about something. So maybe this would be a situation you may find a classmate in, where they might say something to the extent of, Professor, I know this work was subpar, and I feel pretty bad about it. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you to discuss how I can do better on our next assignment. Or, example 2, this is more what I tend to get. And if you ever have a teacher, instructor, professor kind of sigh or roll their eyes, which I hope they don't do, it's probably because the person that talked to them just before you had given them this. Professor, you have to give me an A on this paper. I know I only turned in a sentence and some clip art, but you have to understand, my grandmother suddenly died while traveling in the northern Yukon, and her funeral, that's in Canada, her funeral was there, so I had to travel, and my parents got divorced in the middle of the ceremony, and all the stress caused me to become catatonic for 2 weeks. Have some pity. My grandmother's last wish was that I'd get an A in this class. So that's an extreme example, but I can sit here and tell you that my wife and I have gotten versions of that before. Never all of that in one. And legitimately, we've both had students, like I had a student whose house burned down and she barely managed to get out during Thanksgiving break. I've had people that have lost 3 family members in a month and a half. I mean, it does happen. But usually, the better you communicate that stuff earlier on, the more sympathetic someone's going to be. If you sat there and looked bored while you were failing a test that I gave you, and then you come and try and conjure tears in your eyes to get me to give you another chance or to raise your grade without having to do any more work, chances are good you're not going to find what you're looking for, at least with me. So an appeal to pity would be another example that you could use for this is if you've ever seen any of those ASPCA commercials with the Sarah McLachlan video playing in the background. They don't show you happy, cheerful dogs. They show you the worst of the worst of the worst that human beings have done to animals so that you'll give them money. Same thing with way back in the day, the Children's Miracle Network and things like that, that would raise money for children that were suffering in Africa. They didn't just show you a picture of the kids in clean school uniforms, learning because of the money you donated. They showed you deplorable conditions that the poor people lived in order to tug at your heartstrings. An appeal to pity is just simply trying to manipulate somebody's emotions for the sake of getting them to agree with you. And we see it every day as we drive down the highway with billboards, as we listen to commercials in between podcasts, as we scroll YouTube or Facebook or whatever and get random, commercials trying to get us to do something. All right, the last one is the bandwagon fallacy. All right? Bandwagon fallacy deals with because everyone else is doing it. or because someone or everyone else agrees with it. So an example of this would be, almost everyone at my school will be at the party Friday night. It must be the right thing to do. Or, kind of go back to that, if everyone jumped off a cliff, would you, kind of argument. All right? So those are logical fallacies. They are not all of them, but they're the main ones that you're going to come across more and more and more. So try to avoid including those in your papers if you can help it, because it weakens your overall argument. All right, everybody. I'll see you in the next video.